Photos disappeared, clothes vanished, and evidence was never handed over. In the case of JonBenét Ramsey, these absences raised dark questions. What exactly are the Ramseys hiding, and why is no one talking about it? If you also believe that the gaps in this case hide disturbing truths, subscribe to the channel now. Here we analyze every detail to understand what no one wants us to know. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any piece of this puzzle. Imagine entering a murder case where it's not the clues that speak the loudest, but the gaps, the glaring absences of evidence. Since Christmas 1996, the death of JonBenét Ramsey has been a mystery wrapped in unanswered questions. Photos from Christmas night, they vanished. Crucial clothes, never handed over. Basic yet fundamental details simply disappeared. And it is in this void that the mystery seems to deepen. Today, we will closely examine these absences, ask what they might mean, and perhaps understand what the Ramseys don't want us to know. But first, a warning. The more you know about this case, the more questions you will have. And at the end of this video, we will reveal an omission so unexpected that it might change everything you think about this story. Shortly after the crime, the Ramsey house was in chaos, not only because there was a brutal crime to be investigated, but because it seemed like the basics were missing. Let's start with the photos, or rather, the lack thereof. At that time, digital cameras were not as common, but it was perfectly normal to have rolls and rolls of film to capture moments like Christmas. And in the case of a family like the Ramseys, known for their luxurious lifestyle, you would expect to have hundreds of photos from that period, right? But curiously, there are very few images from Christmas 1996, and none showing what JonBenét was wearing that night, or even how the setting was arranged. Now think about this. Why wouldn't you document Christmas in such a special way? Especially considering that JonBenét was a girl always in the spotlight, participating in beauty contests. And it's not just that. The police requested the clothes the Ramseys wore that night, something standard in any investigation. But it took over a year for these clothes to be handed over. Why? What could have happened during that time? The absence of photos and the delay in delivering the Ramseys' clothes are details that seem harmless at first glance, but become unsettling when placed in context. Imagine the scene. A family that went through a Christmas full of decorations, special meals, and moments that, for anyone, would be precious memories. And yet none of this was recorded, or at least didn't reach us. Now here's the strangest part. This absence is not just a coincidence. Later investigations revealed that the Ramseys had not only a camera, but also video equipment that was loaded and ready to use that night. Only curiously, no recording survived. Ask yourself, how can something so common on such a special night simply not have happened? Or did it happen, but someone decided that these images... When the police began pressuring the family, they requested the clothes worn that night. Something basic, routine in any investigation, right? But instead of handing them over immediately as expected, the Ramseys took over a year to provide what was requested. And here arises an inevitable doubt. What could have happened during that time? Were the clothes washed, discarded, replaced? No one knows for sure. But what was finally delivered was not what the investigators expected. And now I'm going to tell you something few know. A blouse handed over as Patsy Ramsey seemed new, with no signs of use. This raised an uncomfortable question. Was that piece really from the day of the crime? Or was it something added later to appear cooperative? If it was just an innocent mistake, why did they take so long to deliver? This adds another layer of mystery and heightens the feeling that something important is being hidden. But this leads us to an even deeper and more uncomfortable point. The police discovered, through evidence from JonBenét's autopsy, that she ate pineapple that night, something the Ramseys initially denied. They insisted that JonBenét had gone to sleep upon arriving home and never woke up. But how did pineapple end up in her stomach? The analysis showed it had been consumed shortly before her death. And here's the most intriguing part. A bowl with pineapple pieces was found in the kitchen, with fingerprints of Patsy and Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother. Patsy claimed she didn't remember placing that bowl there. Burke said he knew nothing about it either. But again, how is this possible? Was it forgetfulness, a lie, or something more sinister? Let's think together. The pineapple has become one of the biggest symbols of the contradictions in this case. It directly contradicts the timeline presented by the family and suggests that, at least for some time, JonBenét was awake, interacting with someone, and that person knew enough not to leave clear traces or tried their best to hide what happened. Another detail that reinforces this line of reasoning is the ransom note found in the house. An extensive note, written with carefully chosen words, supposedly from someone who broke into the house to kidnap JonBenét. But did you know it was written with a notepad and pen that were inside the house? This means the author had enough time and confidence to sit down, write and plan, something that doesn't match an intruder trying to act quickly. Graphological analyses showed similarities with Patsy Ramsey's handwriting, but it was never possible to definitively prove that she wrote the note. Still, a question remains. Why would an outsider use the house's materials instead of bringing their own? This seems more like an attempt to create a narrative than something genuine. And then, when we look at all this, the missing photos, the clothes that were delayed in being handed over, the pineapple and the ransom note, one thing becomes clear. There is a pattern of important elements being omitted, forgotten, or distorted. It doesn't seem like a coincidence. It looks more like a meticulously constructed story to divert attention from something or someone. And the most unsettling part? This strategy worked. For years, the narrative revolved around external hypotheses: an intruder, a random crime, a tragedy that couldn't be explained. But at the same time, the simplest details, the clothes, the photos, the pineapple, continued to scream for answers that never came. Now I ask you, is it a coincidence that so many basic elements are missing? Or are we looking at a case where the most important pieces were intentionally hidden? And you know what's even more disturbing? Every time new evidence emerges, it seems to create more questions than answers. But maybe that's exactly what someone wanted from the beginning, to keep the mystery alive while the truth remains buried in details that no one noticed in time. The absence of photos and the inexplicable delay in handing over the clothes have already cast a shadow of doubt, but there are other details in the Ramsey case that raise even more disturbing questions. And here's the most interesting part. Many of these questions were not asked by accident. They arise from gaps created within the narrative presented by the family in the investigation. For example, the ransom note. Remember it? A 3-page note written inside the house with a pen and paper that belonged to the Ramseys? Have you ever stopped to think about how much time someone would need to write something like that? We're not talking about a quick message or a generic threat. It was a long text full of specific details, including a ransom demand of exactly $118,000, the same amount as John Ramsey's bonus that year. Now think with me, who would break into a house, commit such a serious crime, and still have the time and calm something an intruder would do in a risky situation, right? This discrepancy led many to believe that the note was an attempt to cover up what really happened, a staged play created to confuse investigators. And here comes an intriguing theory. If the note was written to divert attention, this means that the real motive and the true culprit are much closer than we imagine. In fact, graphological analyses pointed out significant similarities between Patsy Ramsey's handwriting and the note's handwriting. Although no conclusive evidence was found, the shadow of doubt remained. After all, if it wasn't her, why was the person who wrote the note so comfortable doing so inside the house? But the note isn't the only element suggesting an attempt to control the narrative. Let's talk about the broken window. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, claimed that the basement window was broken because he had damaged it himself months earlier, during an incident where he forgot the keys and had to enter the house. However, a crucial detail was ignored at the time. If the window was already broken, why wasn't it repaired? And more, why were glass fragments still scattered, as if the incident had happened recently? And this leads us to another theory. Some believe that the window was used to simulate an entry point for the supposed intruder, reinforcing the idea that someone from outside had committed the crime. But here's the problem. No concrete evidence of an intruder was found. There were no footprints in the snow around the house. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing that supported this narrative. And then we return to what might be the strangest part of all, the crime scene. JonBenét was found in the basement of her own house, in a location that was initially not even searched by the police. It was John Ramsey who found her, hours later, on a white blanket, with a rope tied around her neck and a piece of tape over her mouth. He carried her upstairs, completely contaminating the crime scene. A desperate father? Maybe. But for many investigators, this act raised suspicions. If he knew the police needed to analyze every detail of the location, why did he make a decision that would so hinder their work? And you know what's even more disturbing? It wasn't just the crime scene that was full of inconsistencies. It was also the timeline presented by the Ramseys themselves. For example, Patsy claimed she found the ransom note when she went down to the kitchen on the morning of December 26th. She said she immediately called the police and informed John. But there's a detail that was never explained. Why was the note on the stairs and not in a place where the kidnappers knew it would be found? And more, if JonBenét was already dead in the basement, what was the purpose of the note? Here comes a hypothesis that few discuss. What if the note wasn't written to deceive the police, but to confuse the public? Think about it. The JonBenét case quickly gained worldwide attention. The image of a 6-year-old girl, a little beauty queen, was featured in newspapers and magazines around the world. The ransom note added an element of mystery that ensured the case remained in the headlines. But could this entire attention not have been exactly what someone wanted? A media spectacle to divert focus from what really mattered? And speaking of the media, we can't ignore how it influenced public perception of the case. The Ramseys hired a lawyer almost immediately, and instead of openly cooperating with the police, gave carefully controlled interviews. Many of these interviews were criticized for seeming rehearsed, with responses that avoided any kind of commitment. So, what is the truth behind it all? Did the Ramseys really not know what happened that night? Or is there something they are hiding? And if they are, what could be so serious as to justify a series of actions that, in many people's eyes, seem only to increase the mystery instead of providing answers? This is the point where the case becomes even more complicated, because every time we try to put the puzzle together, it seems that a piece is always missing, a piece that we might never have because it was deliberately taken out of the box. And now I ask you, how does all this connect? The photos that never appeared, the clothes delivered too late, the note that seems more like a piece of fiction than a real threat. Are we facing a cover-up much bigger than we imagine? Shortly after the police began pressing for answers about the missing items from the scene, such as clothes, cameras, and important records, one specific detail caught attention. It wasn't just the fact that the clothes took over a year to be handed over, but the way some of them seemed inadequate. The red blouse Patsy Ramsey handed over, for example, seemed new, as if it had never been worn.
Really the piece
This
she wore
immediately
that night?
raised a question. Or worse, had it been intentionally replaced? Now let's connect this to what we know. Imagine the following. It's Christmas, a night when the whole family should be taking photos, especially in a house decorated with care and luxury. Only strangely, there are almost no records from that night. No images of the dinner, no photos of the moment when presents were exchanged, and most importantly, no visual evidence of JonBenét that night. And here is where things get even stranger. According to police reports, the camera the Ramseys used was found in the process of being reloaded. Patsy even admitted in one of her statements that she intended to use it the next morning to capture moments with the family. But something changed. Could this camera have been deliberately reloaded that early morning to replace a compromising roll of film? Or were the photos taken and then simply discarded? Have you ever stopped to think about what else might be missing in this story? It's not just the photos and the clothes that raise suspicions, but the way the Ramseys handled everything from the start. The police took months to gain access to essential parts of the investigation, such as the clothes, financial records, and even the possibility of interrogating the eldest son, Burke. It was as if every detail had to go through a filter, and this only fueled the idea that something was being hidden. Now think with me, if you were unjustly accused of something so serious, wouldn't you do everything to cooperate and prove your innocence? Why then take so long to hand over basic objects and respond to simple investigation requests? And here comes a point that most people never noticed. During interrogations, Patsy and John were questioned about the whereabouts of videotapes. They admitted that they used to record important family moments, but curiously, none of these tapes were found by the police. Could these recordings have contained something that couldn't be seen? Moreover, the Ramseys were always meticulous in documenting JonBenét's life. As a child who participated in beauty contests, she was used to being in front of cameras, whether in photographs or videos. So the absence of these images in the period close to Christmas 1996 is at the very least suspicious. But that's not all. An investigator revealed years later that among the belongings collected from the house, there was a roll of film that was never disclosed. It simply disappeared during transport to the forensic lab. This detail opened the door to another theory. Could someone with access to the investigation have helped erase this evidence? After all, the idea of a larger conspiracy was never entirely dismissed, and then arises the most unsettling question of all. If these missing elements were gathered today, what could they tell us? Images showing JonBenét that night could clarify, for example, if she already showed signs of any incident before the morning of the 26th. A video recorded during Christmas might show something unusual in the family dynamics. But without these pieces, we are stuck with an incomplete puzzle. The most ironic thing of all is that, even with so many holes in the narrative, the Ramseys continued to position themselves as victims of a poorly conducted investigation. John even publicly declared that the police should be looking for real suspects instead of focusing on the family. But if everything is as simple as they claim, why do so many gaps remain open? And you, what do you think about this? Why would photos, clothes, and videos disappear in such a serious case? Was it a mistake or a deliberate attempt to hide something? Meanwhile, the absence of these elements not only hampers the investigation, but also fuels doubt and distrust around everything that happened that night. What we know so far is that each missing piece carries a huge weight. Every missing photo, every disappearing record is a lost possibility to uncover the truth about JonBenét. And at the same time, these absences force us to ask, what else is being hidden and why? But as you will see next, this is not the only layer of this story. There is another clue that can shed more light on this mystery, and it is directly linked to the Ramseys' behavior after the crime. The missing pieces in the Ramseys' narrative, clothes that took a year to be handed over, missing photos of a Christmas that should have been meticulously recorded, and recordings that simply disappeared, create an impossible void to ignore. When we connect these facts to the family's cautious behavior, a pattern emerges that, at the very least, raises suspicions. And here is the key point. What does all this really mean? If these absences are just coincidences or human errors, why do they appear at such critical moments of the case? Is that there are more unanswered questions than we can accept in such a remarkable crime. The delay in cooperating, the gaps in the story, and the selectivity in handing over evidence make it difficult to shake the feeling that something was intentionally hidden. And now we reach the main question. What if what's missing isn't just physical evidence, but the complete truth about what happened to JonBenét? Perhaps the key to solving the case lies precisely in these empty spaces, in the things that were never said or handed over. If you watched up to here, comment, "I am the key to the truth," so I know you followed until the end. And take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. The next video will bring even more surprising revelations about how the details that no one notices can change the entire perception of a case. If you have suggestions for topics or stories you'd like to see here, leave them in the comments. After all, every piece counts. Now click on the next video to continue this journey. I promise you will discover something that will make you rethink everything you've heard so far. See you there.